Hello, hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Gyres Trash Academy, where we learn all about the life cycle of plastic. Once again, my name is Melissa Aguayo, and I've been your host for this journey. So our plastic journey is almost coming to an end, and it appears as though we have a pretty big and global problem on our hands that we need to face. We've studied how our plastic became dependent on plastic after the overproduction in World War II. We learned about how this dependence became a global pollution problem. We've seen how plastic ends up in the ocean after it may only be used once or twice, and how it travels through the ocean, wreaking havoc and leaving destruction in its path. Now it's time to answer an important question. What can we do to create change and be a part of the solution? So let's start by breaking down some key terms as we talk about creating change on different levels. And you'll know what I mean in a second. So we'll start with the individual. A lot of the time solutions, when we talk about solutions, we talk about the individual. That means you as a single human being, as distinguished from a group. So what can each one of us do as individuals? But we're also going to be talking about systemic and systematic and institutional change. So systemic is describing something that happens or exists throughout a whole system. Systematic describes something that was thorough and intentional, methodical, or implemented according to a plan. And institutional means relating to organized establishments, foundations, societies, or the like, or to buildings devoted to their work. So you have some of these terms have been coming into conversations a lot more in the past few weeks. So we just wanted to start with some quick definitions so that we're all on the same page. So, all right, let's start with some individual choices. There are so many things that all of us can do to help reduce plastic. As we've been learning about plastic pollution, its harmful effects on animals and on communities, you may have found yourself thinking, well, how can we stop this problem, right? What are some of the solutions, some of the things, some of the actions that we can take? Maybe some of you have been inspired as you've been learning about Trash Academy and have put some of these solutions into place. So a great place to start is with the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce, using less plastic by choosing different options, such as using less disposable water bottles and instead using tap water if you have access to healthy, clean water, or even getting one of those larger jugs or a filter if that's an option as well. Reuse, using items that can be used over and over again instead of just once, like a reusable cloth bag at the grocery store, or maybe even finding new ways to reuse some of your single-use plastic containers, like maybe use a yogurt container for some leftovers. I know in my house, growing up, when I'd open the fridge, if I found a yogurt container, it was probably more likely to contain leftovers than yogurt. So my mom was a master of reuse. Recycle, making sure that when we do use plastic and we do need to dispose of it, that it is getting recycled so that it can be broken down and made into something new. Just remember from our previous lessons, we learned that not all plastic can be recycled, only some are being accepted. So that's something that you should take into consideration as well when you are purchasing plastic products, right? Is what are the ones that can be recycled? And maybe even calling or finding information about your local recycler and finding what kinds of plastics are being accepted and actively recycled. So these 3 R's are pretty familiar to all of us. We've talked about a lot of these, but as we're looking to slow the flow of plastic, we really need to bring into the conversation another 3 R's. Rethink. So this is a really important one. Hopefully, as you've been going through these lessons with us and you've learned more about plastic in your journey, it's caused you to re-examine your relationship with plastic. Maybe we can change the way we think about our current lifestyles and reimagine products we make and consume into more sustainable options, such as committing to make your own food at home instead of using takeout containers, or creating and using shampoo bars instead of traditional shampoo. And there's all kinds of options like that as well if you don't have time to make those. But just really taking the time to think, well, why are we using expanded polystyrene when it contains toxins, right? So just taking that moment to rethink our relationship with plastic is really important as well. Repair is another important R. So instead of just throwing our plastic items away, we can repair them and make them whole again. So this goes back to one of our first lessons, learning about the history of plastic. Remember, this was pre-World War II mentality. We fixed everything we had. Everything had value. And if it could be fixed, we put that effort in. Now, as we've gotten into more of a linear economy, more, more cheaply made items, things get thrown away and we just continue to buy. Really taking the time to repair when that's an option is amazing. So one example for this is Patagonia. They have an awesome care and repair program, as well as refurbished electronics. I'm a big fan of refurbished electronics myself, personally. It's what I use, and cheaper. And it keeps those things out of the waste stream. Oh my, okay. And then finally, we have refuse. This is one of the most important 6 R's. Simply by refusing to use disposable plastics as much as you can, allows for these will be produced less, and less will end up in our oceans over time. So refusing to buy a cup of coffee unless you have your own mug. Sometimes it's those kinds of hard choices, right? Where it's like, oh, well, I didn't bring my reusable, so maybe I'll pass. Or maybe I'll, when things change, maybe I'll have it inside the store and just like take those 15 minutes to pause and really enjoy my coffee. So again, that's putting that rethink and that refuse right into action with that reuse. So lots of ways to use those 6 R's in different capacities. So just by remembering these 6 words, reduce, refuse, rethink, repair, recycle, and oh my gosh, even I'm forgetting the other R. But this is how we can start to drastically cut down our plastic waste every day and become part of the global plastic solution. And all of these actions ripple out to those around you. People are looking at you and they're seeing the actions that you're taking, and they incorporate those into their lives as well. So although it's just one individual, it does ripple out. Another concrete action you can take is, as an individual, is bringing your own reusable water bottle with you and refusing those single-use plastic water bottles. Most places in the US, we have access to clean, healthy water, and that's a great, easy way. You can just carry your own reusable water bottle. It's so convenient. I know we talk about convenience with plastic a lot. Carrying your own reusable water bottle is so convenient, and most places will allow you to refill those for free. So you can choose to also support businesses that practice refill and reuse. And the more of these businesses or institutions that adopt this model, this is how we'll get to that systemic change. So this is why we were talking about those definitions early on. So we can see how can these individual actions lead to systemic change, because it's too much to place the onus just on individuals, right? Not everybody has the capacity or the privilege to be able to practice some of these things. So the more that we can adopt these refill models, circular economy, to get us to that systemic change, that's where we're really going to see big change on a big level. So doing little things like going to refill stores, those kinds of things will get us to that systemic change. So the BYO, the bring your own, is a great interim step until we can get to these big systemic changes, so that it just becomes something that we all have access to. So getting back to continuing with greater change, right? Individuals leading to bigger change. Voting is an amazing one. So whether it's voting with an actual vote or with your dollar, there are many ways that you can contribute by voting with your dollar. So one of them is simply by contributing to political campaigns that support policies and ideas that you believe in. You can also donate to organizations that promote policies and advocate for causes that you believe in and that align with your values. Aside from literally donating to campaigns and organizations, you also have a lot of power in terms of where you spend your money. As an individual, you can support institutions and businesses that are working towards systemic change and a circular economy. So that's that frog telling you, put your money where your mouth is, right? Again, sometimes that's not something that we all have the ability to do, but whenever possible, putting those dollars to businesses, organizations that align with your values, this is how we are putting the money in the right places. Continuing on in that individual change that leads to that systemic and institutional change, flexing your civic muscle. So this is super important. This is an amazing way that you can make a difference. So one way of flexing your civic muscle is by voting. So you might be thinking, well, how can I make a difference in plastic pollution through voting? It's a great question. Take some time to learn about what candidates are running in your local and state elections. These individuals have the ability to change and implement policies that can reduce or increase levels of pollution in our environment and communities. So for example, you could vote for a candidate that advocates for a plastic bag ban or a ban on plastic straws or other single-use plastic items. Another example is that there may be a political advocate who's advocating to loosen environmental restrictions for the amount of toxic pollution a factory can release into your community's air or local waterways, for example. In this example, you could support the opposing candidate, and if they win, then you're effectively able to prevent harmful policies from being enacted. Another great way is also just by getting to know these people a little bit better. Who are these elected officials? Flexing your civic muscle doesn't always have to mean voting. Sometimes it's simply calling and saying, hey, there's this policy there's this bill that is on the floor. And as your constituent, I'm asking you to support it, or I'm asking you to vote against this bill that's looking to weaken some of these environmental policies. So giving calls, sending emails, even just getting together for a meet and greet. Those are all things that that is our right, because these people, these elected officials, represent us. They represent their constituencies. So we got to use our voice. So we have learned so much about how plastic pollution impacts our environment and our planet. But we also started talking about environmental justice and how this is impacting entire communities when we were looking about the life cycle of plastic. So let's take a deeper dive to understand a little bit more on how plastic pollution impacts these human communities in its life cycle. Let's watch this short clip to kind of understand a little bit more and why we're talking about beyond individual change, why we're talking about systemic and institutional change, and how we fit into those.
Nationally, the facilities where we dump our garbage and process dangerous chemicals tend to be located in poor and minority communities. The people who live there have little or no protection from the industries around them, and things could get worse. So there's this idea of environmental justice. It's pretty simple. Communities shouldn't be forced to deal with more pollution because they belong to a certain race, national origin, or income bracket. Yet America has struggled over the years to implement any serious policy that actually protects these communities. So let's lay out the ways the government has failed them.
We will not allow Warren County to become a dump site.
The fight for environmental justice took off in 1982, when residents of Warren County, North Carolina, mounted mass demonstrations against a plan to dump contaminated soil in a landfill in their community. The EPA investigated 4 similar landfills in southern states and found that they were all located in Black or low-income neighborhoods. In 1987, the United Church of Christ Racial Justice Commission found that around the country, hazardous waste facilities were more likely to be located in mostly minority communities. Amid mounting proof, the federal government was forced to act.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
So in 1992, President George H.W. Bush founded the Office of Environmental Justice inside the EPA. 2 years later, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order requiring federal agencies to consider environmental justice in all of their policies, as well as extending civil rights protection to environmental discrimination. But Congress never passed a bill to make Clinton's executive order law. Then came George W. Bush. His administration shifted the focus of the Office of Environmental Justice from protecting low-income and minority communities to all people, leaving vulnerable populations without a federal environmental advocate.
80% of New Orleans, including much of downtown, is underwater.
Under Bush, many environmental civil rights claims were rejected or delayed for years. In 2009, after President Barack Obama's election, his administration recommitted to environmental justice.
Generally speaking, in this country, a lot of environmentally problematic facilities tend to be located in places where poor folks live.
Yet, during the 2 years Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, they didn't file a single bill focused on strengthening environmental justice protections. Passing major environmental legislation faded further when Republicans took control of Congress in the 2010 midterm elections. Now, President Donald J. Trump is making good on his vow to weaken the EPA.
Environmental protection, what they do is a disgrace. Every week they come out with new regulations. They're making it
Who's going to
impossible.
protect the environment?
They will be fine with the environment. We can leave a little bit.
This budget, a 31% cut to the EPA, $2.6 billion cut away from the EPA. That's what the president wants. As the EPA loses funding and regulations are rolled back, vulnerable communities may very likely fall through the cracks. I'm Talia Buford. I'll be covering these communities and digging into systemic environmental injustice. If you have something to tell me, email me at talia.buford@propublica.org.
All right, so I think this video says a lot, right? But we can see how voting for the right people can either strengthen some of the environmental policies that we have, or at least start to introduce some, and how voting for the wrong people can sometimes weaken some of those. And also, even having the right people in place isn't enough, right? That's why we have to keep that pressure. So how do we turn, as we learn more, how do we turn this awareness into advocacy and ultimately into action and change? How do we start to understand these interconnectedness, all these intersections with these larger issues, and really start to really make sure that this awareness is going just beyond knowing about these issues, but turning it into advocacy and into action, and making sure that we're bringing the voices of those underserved communities to the table? Because when we look out for those who are most impacted, we're ultimately looking out for ourselves as well. I think sometimes we forget that looking out for the most vulnerable communities benefits everybody along the way. So I know we're talking a lot about using our personal power here.
In the last 60 seconds, how many folks have taken a breath of air? Hold your hand up if you've taken a breath of air.
Here we go. So we're talking a lot about using our power to affect change. So we wanted to play a little video from the amazing environmentalist Mustafa Santiago Ali to really kind of guide us to, well, maybe you don't live in an environmental justice community. Maybe you don't necessarily see that connection. So let's watch this little clip to try to better understand our power and how we can use this privilege to help all of these communities, including ourselves, go from surviving to thriving.
Everybody look around. Everybody look around. Find the non-air breathers. Seems like a silly question, doesn't it? Seems like a silly question because it's an autonomic response. It's something that we naturally do. When we breathe in, we expect to be receiving something positive to our bodies. But just like in Warren County, North Carolina, we have far too many communities across our country who are still battling every day for a breath of fresh air. Places like the Manchester community in Houston, Texas, primarily a Latino community. When you go to this community and you roll the windows down in your car, you feel like you're breathing in gasoline fumes. In our country, the wealthiest country supposedly on the planet, depending on how you evaluate wealth. Mossville, Louisiana, people have dioxins in their blood, many times coming from the emissions from plants. Port Arthur, Texas, where the hurricanes came through and where the pipelines end. People can't breathe. The plants, the refinery rule, which is so important to help to contain some of the emissions, they're being impacted. Children are being impacted in this space. And that's why when I ask the question, how many of you have taken a breath of fresh air? It is a very simplistic question, but there are many complexities that are underneath of that to make sure that the residents of our country have the opportunity to actually be able to move forward in a way. So when we talk about healthy and sustainable communities, we cannot get to that if we're not addressing our frontline communities. Everybody put your right hand in the air.
And if
I want y'all to join me. Everybody say
this.
power. Say power. One last time, I want you to hear the folks in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill and at the other place, knowing that we have power and that we are going to stay engaged, and that if you can't do the job, we'll find somebody who will. Everyone say power. I'm Mustafa Santiago Ali.
Very, very powerful. I think it's just a reminder of how much power we all have, and that these systemic issues and these institutions sometimes try to have us forget how powerful we really are as individuals, how powerful we are as communities. And so we're talking about plastic pollution in this moment, but it doesn't always have to be about plastic pollution. It's about using your voice to create that change. And so again, remembering from the individual choices that we make, but really trying to get to those systemic changes, to those institutional changes, because that's what's going to really create change on a national level, on a global level, that's going to work for all communities, not just privileged communities, but underserved communities as well. And by helping out those frontline communities, by bringing them to the table and bringing those solutions, we're helping all of us as well. And also a reminder that as we are talking about solutions, some of this work is hard. Doing this environmental work, environmental justice work, it's not always easy. So it's a reminder that it is a movement. It's not just a moment. So the work continues beyond today. But don't forget, as you're looking to make some of these changes, to also take some time for yourself, because this can be challenging. So self-care is very much important as we are talking about solutions. We're in this for the long run, right? So we have to remember to take care of ourselves in that process as well, as we're looking to take care of others. It's the put your mask on first. So for your challenge, this is a really good one. And I know some of them have been kind of like informational, but I really, really challenge you to put this one into action. So I challenge you to research your local politicians. Find one that stands up for policies that you believe in, and follow them on social media. Sign up for their emails to learn how you can get involved. Better yet, set up a meet and greet. It's really super easy, and it is your right as their constituent. They want to hear from you. Or maybe they don't, but they should hear from you. So, set up a call, set up a meeting. Most of these people, most of these electeds have field deputies within certain regions that are the ones who are supposed to connect them with their constituents to whatever issues that they're facing. So get connected. You don't have to have a particular issue now, but get to know them so that when an issue does arise, you have the relationship built already. Get to know some of the environmental justice groups in your community. Get connected to an environmental organization. So join some of these organizations that are already looking to create change and work within that, or organize your own. But again, always keeping in mind that we're trying to get to not just individual solutions, which are super important, and we certainly all have a responsibility in this, but really trying to get to those systemic changes, to those institutional changes, so that we can get solutions that work for all. All right. Well, again, I really challenge you to put this one into practice. At a minimum, find out who are your local electeds. Usually if you kind of Google just where you can find your local elected, you can put in just your address, and it will give you exactly who you're connected to. I'll try to find a link and put it in the comments here, but really, really challenge you to put this one into action. So be sure to join us next week. Next week, we'll talk more about solutions that are actually working, which is exciting. Right now, we're talking about how we can be a part of the solution, right? But we're actually going to talk about some of these solutions that are working. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you are a Spanish speaker or know anybody who is, join us tomorrow for La Academia de Basura. If not, we will see you next Wednesday for our final lesson of Trash Academy in this first iteration. Bye.